is brought to you through NVL, Nordisk Vuxnes Lærende, Nordic Adult Learning, a network for adult education, cooperation in adult education throughout the Scandinavian countries and the Nordic countries, reaching from Greenland all the way to Finland. And I am a member of Distance, which is a network which is dealing with how to use computer technology to support adult learning. So we are supporting AlfaradetTeacherCompetence, which is the NVL network, which focuses on literacy and numeracy, and I'm just a host here. And the main stars of the show today are Helen Casey, who comes from the National Research and Development Center for Adult Literacy and Numeracy at the Institute of Education at the University of London, and her competencies lie in teacher education. She's been training teachers to teach adults. And Karin Franker is in Sweden at the University of Gothenburg, where she leads a master's program for Swedish as a second language. And Karin will be giving us a presentation called Teacher Competencies for Initial and Functional Literacy, and a bit more, many more words there. And Helen Casey will be talking about these teacher competencies and telling us about her experience and comment on what Karin has been talking about. Is this just about right, Helen?
Yeah, that's fine.
Fine. And I'd like to draw your attention to a booklet which was written by the AlfaradetTeacherCompetence with a description of teachers' competencies. You can go through it here on the site and on this page, and then later on you can download it, and I expect you already have. So the program is very simple. We'll be listening to Karin Franker give her presentation, and then Helen will be commenting afterwards, and then around a quarter to 20 minutes to 1 we'll open the floor for your question. So you can, I think will be so many that we'll have to use just a chat, but if somebody really wants to, I could give you the microphone, and you can just raise your hand and ask for the microphone. So I think this is good for a big start, and I will just go over to Karin, who will, you can write your questions here to Karin, and Karin, I think, will just give you the floor.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the title is, as you can see, Teacher Competencies for Initial and Functional Literacy Education for Adult Immigrants in the Nordic countries. And I will try to present this first Nordic description of those competencies. And it's produced by the Nordic Alpha Council, as Jartur just said, a network with experts in this field from all the Nordic countries. It was funded by NVL and the Nordic Council of Ministers. So then I will just very briefly present the Alpha Council. Just to see here. And we are 9 persons, 2 from each of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. So it's Sissel Vollan and Beate Linnaryd from the Vox organization and Agency for Lifelong Learning in Norway, in Oslo, Norway. and it's Peter Villasveder from the Ministry of Education in Denmark, and it's also Lily Christensen from a Voksenuddannelse Center in Frederiksberg in Denmark. And it's me from representing Institute for Swedish as Second Language, a research institute here at the University of Gothenburg. And from Sweden is also Inga-Lena Rydén from the National Center for Swedish as Second Language at the University of Stockholm. And then we have Pirjo Immonen Oikkonen from the National Board of Education in Finland, and Gudmundur Kristmundsson from the University of Iceland, Reykjavik. And Carolina Matras, she's our newest member, and we're very proud of having the Faroe Islands in our expert team. They've all contributed to this description of the competencies that I've had. I did most of the writing together with Lily Christensen. So one important focus area for the Nordic Adult Literacy Network is the quality assurance of basic literacy education for adults with a non-Nordic mother tongue. And I will tell you a little bit about the background for this competence description, and then I will go into each of the 6 competence areas and give a short example on each competence area, just to give you a feeling of our intentions and the underlying theories. And the presentation will end with some thoughts regarding the implementation, possibilities of implementation of the competence description at various levels. So let's start. It all started with a mapping of adult literacy in the Nordic countries, because there hadn't been any mapping at all done at this particular kind of education for these low literate adults. And this, what we made was a comparison across the Nordic countries, 5 of the Nordic countries then. And it was published in 2007, as you can see, and it was based on statistics, laws and regulations concerning the conditions for second language adult literacy provision. And the report showed a very diversified picture. And to sum up some of the results is that there were very few governing documents and rules for this particular adult education. And although it's said to be a very complex educational situation and complex demands on teachers, of course. And we found a great ignorance and a huge uncertainty about the terms and conditions that should master this education. So we really needed a better description of the competence that was needed for this basic instruction for the teachers. So apart from this KAN report, this mapping that we did and got all these statistics, we also took into account the teachers' experiences and their practice, their experienced practice should be. And we did that at a few Nordic adult conferences and also in other ways. So we tried to collect as much as we could of experienced teachers' practice. And then we also had discussions with various experts and scholars in current research in subjects as adult pedagogy, reading and writing acquisition, adult literacy, of course, and second language learning development. And this gave us a base for constructing this competence description. As the description grew and changed, we had valuable feedback from teachers during this process on our Nordic Alpha conferences that we have. So it really feels like still a work in progress, but maybe that's the way it should be. But it's still one clear step up, we think. So many of you maybe have downloaded this brochure in which you find this comprehensive definitions of the special competencies required, as we have found them to be. And it's our hope that through this, through providing this comprehensive definition of the specific competencies, it can form a base for development and implementation of teacher education. And we also hope it, of course, to inspire and develop teaching practice. So the overall aim, one could say that to create a more favorable conditions for the learners, of course, with regard to their future studies, work opportunities, and active social participation as citizens. So that's the overall aim. So let's look at the competencies now. In this little booklet or brochure, they presented one after another, but I've arranged them in a certain way here. And I'm going to start from the bottom line with the three content areas, main content areas for an adult literacy teacher. So competence area number 4 is teaching oral communicative competence. A fairly neglected area, I think. It could be much more done there. And 5, the 5th competence area, teaching initial and functional literacy competence. And the 6th, teaching basic everyday mathematics. That's what we sometimes call numeracy, but I think it's more limited, this part of it. Numeracy is much more than this, but I think this has to be into the literacy. So all these 3 different teaching areas, they do need material for working in a proper way. So competence area number 3 is materials for adult learning. And all this has to have theory and insights, and you get that for the educational part from area number 2, how to create a creative and critical adult learning environment, where we find theories on education and pedagogy for adults. And then, of course, competence area number 1, that's literacy. And we look at it from global, local, and individual perspective. It gives us theory and insights that so we can have form our approach to the other areas. So I just want to say some words also about the structure of each competence area. So it's divided into 3 parts. First, we have the teacher competence. That's a summary of the competence expressed by what the teacher can do or does when he or she has achieved the competence, this specific competence. And then this competence is divided into knowledge, which are the more theoretical part, and skills and action, which are more practical part. And knowledge are then followed by a certain different points, and they are all trying to pinpoint what kind of knowledge and at which level. So it's knowledge from a very surfaced way, to be aware of something, to be familiar with, deep down to having developed insight into and has expertise concerning. And if you look at the skills and action points and the text there, it should show that the teachers, what the teachers must show in his or her understanding and actions. And this is expressed in terms like that the teacher utilizes, creates, evaluates, chooses, guides, provides, monitors, those kinds of verbs. So this is the way each of these competence areas are structured, with knowledge and skills and actions. So let's look at the first one, literacy in a global, local and individual perspective. Theoretical aspects on and didactic aspects on approaches. So one of the points there is that the teacher is familiar with the complexity of the concept of literacy. And it's really a very complex concept. You can say that there are two main approaches to adult literacy, and the one to the left are the autonomous, looking at it as an autonomous skill, and that view on literacy is very prominent in school all around the world. And still, I mean, this metaphor that we see there, this one is from a school book in Mozambique, if I remember right. But I mean, that education, this is the way that education goes on, and the teacher is filling the student with knowledge. So the teacher is active here, and the student is just sitting there waiting. And if you have a very good teacher, then you will learn. Otherwise, nothing will happen. One could laugh at this one, but I think it's a very strong metaphor. So opposed to this view on literacy as something happening in school and something that's monitored by a teacher, a real teacher, is the view on literacy as a social practice, as a practice embedded in a context and never existing, just flying around on its own, always in a context and in some sort of communicative situation anyway. And the view that the society has, the attitudes towards the students, the low literacy adult students, is very important to take into account and to be aware of. And I just have an example here. It's an ad from Standard Bank, who is sponsoring this adult education for low literate. And although, I mean, they really mean very well and they are very concerned, they write like this, the yellow thing here. To us, this man, Jimmy Kobela, one of the students, he may look 73 years old, but inside he's more like a 6-year-old with a whole new world to discover. So what do we say about that? I mean, that view on an adult. Of course, I mean, he has got this something common with a 6-year-old, just the lack of the decoding skill maybe, but everything else is so different. I mean, he's got his life and his experience, and he's got a totally different cognitive level, of course. So the education that he's going to meet has to be very different from a literacy education for a 6- and 7-year-old, of course. I think I also have a quotation from one adult literacy student here in southern Sweden. He said, "In my own country, I was looked upon as an adult, but here I'm like a child, as my children had to take care of me. So I suffer, and I cannot accept this." And I think this is not very unusual, that many of our students, they have felt very confident and competent in their old society, the society which they have been forced to leave. But coming here, they have lost it. And an important task for the adult education is to facilitate for this man to function as an adult. I mean, to help him to keep his authority and his self-respect.
Now this was interesting. We suddenly lost Karen. I wonder what's going on. Karen, I can see you there, but I cannot hear you. And Case, Helen, I just turned your sound. I turned off your sound. Just a minute. Now we should be able to hear Helen. I wonder what's going on, why we can't hear Karen anymore. Karen, can you come back? This is interesting. Helen, you can hear us? Okay.
Yes, I can.
While she's coming back, maybe we could get questions from we would like Karen to answer her own questions, but maybe you could tell us a bit from your experience. Have you, she was talking about complexity of literacy. Maybe you take it from there for a few minutes and see if Karen comes back.
I could start by maybe introducing myself a little bit. Maybe that's more helpful than coming into the middle of what Karen is talking about for us. I do hope she reappears, because it was very interesting. So hello everybody. You get a little bit of me earlier than expected. I'm the director of the NRDC in London. We're the National Research and Development Centre for Adult Literacy and Numeracy, and we're based at the Institute of Education in London. That's part of the University of London. But my own background is that I spent many years as a teacher of language and literacy to adult learners, including very low literacy learners. I then worked in teacher education for some years before I got involved in the research centre, and I've also probably for the last 10-15 years been working with policy developments in this area. So I hope that when Karen has finished telling us about the very interesting work that you've been doing in the Nordic group, I can throw in some of the experience of how we took a set of competencies like that and kind of put them into practice. It's the implementation of how you go from, I suppose, the challenge is if you have a good set of teacher competencies, what do you have to do to reach a situation where every adult learner has the benefit of being taught by someone who has all those competencies? And I think that's what I'd be interested in hearing people's thoughts on as we go into the discussion. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but Robert seems to have disappeared. So
I haven't. I just gave you the floor.
Okay, that's what happens.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
And Karen seems to. I saw her a few seconds ago. Maybe if I've made her into a presenter. Karen, would you like to try to come back? I'm trying to call her on the telephone as well.
Hello, I'm back.
Oh, you're back. Okay, can you turn on your camera? Helen, are you okay with this? Just
I'm
lovely.
Absolutely fine. I've reached a natural break to reintroduce Karen.
Lovely. I'm turning myself off, and we're going back to Karen's slides. Here you go. This was quite interesting.
I don't know what happened.
And
oh gosh, yeah.
No. Suddenly you disappeared, and then you came back. So that's the main thing. Okay.
So I'm here again. So I'll continue with this. The second competence area, that's about the learning environment. And of course the learning environment for adults are both inside and outside the ordinary classroom. And that's of course feels very natural if you have this view of literacy too, as the social-based literacy. If you should create a learning environment, it's important that you take every learner's resources into account. I mean, to use all the language that the adult literacy learners has got, past and present ones, and all literacy experiences, past and present, and look at their social networks, past and present, and use them in the ordinary classroom and in the ordinary training sessions. So we can look at just one example. This is one of the students on an introduction course, Willy, and his social network. He's 32 years old, and what we did was that we asked him to gather and be attentive to when, where, and with whom he interacts in Swedish or his other languages. That was Mandinka and some English. And then we found out that he first spoke to his close family. His wife was Swedish, and his little daughter, and to the personnel at the kindergarten. And he was a member of 2 football teams, one at the language school and another one. And he had a mentor, a shoemaker in town that he went to get advice. And he was from Haiti, I think. It was his literacy class. And he also had a neighbor that was from Hungary who he met during his walks around his neighborhood, and also his wife's relatives. So when we got to know this, I mean, we could use this as learning material. and we could also at the same time strengthen his and connect the things we were doing in school with his ordinary daily practice. So his resources, when they were revealed, they became sources for learning and sources for creating learning material. So this is an easy way to create the learning material that you should use in the during the training sessions. So the material for adult learning should be very up to date, and they should also be very multimodal and challenging for an adult. Of course, we have to use this mobile phone or these cell phones because in the mobile phone or in the cell phones, then you find the world's history of written language. It's all from pictures to graphemes. You find them all there, all the different signs, pictograms, ideograms, different kinds of logos, logograms, and letters. So you can really make use of it in a very successful way, and it's also interesting for your students. And to be functionally literate in the Nordic countries, I mean, you are expected to act properly in various adult roles, and in all literacy events that occur, situation in which literacy competences is needed to solve the actual problem, because adults want to solve their problems and they want to be able to do that on their own. So there's a lot of different types of practices that you find here that the adults want to master themselves, and a lot of interesting literacy material to use. Just let them bring it or walk out there and meet it. So one kind of material, I've written here forbidden material for adults, but I think that still you find these kind of books and exercises, beginner readers for, in this case, Swedish 6-7-year-old children. It's not suitable for adults, and they're also extremely complex, though their form is very, very easy, but the content and the possibility to understand them are fairly problematic. And it's also infantilizing, I think, the adult learner. And they never say no to material that the teacher puts to them. So you have to do that yourself as a teacher.
Karen?
It's a time up.
The time is up, yes. We really need to give Helen the floor.
Can I just rush it through? I won't say very much, but I just, yeah?
Yeah,
and then
please do,
I
Karen,
can leave the end with the implementation now. So just rush through.
But quickly, yeah.
This is about the mother tongue teachers as a resource for the oral education. And it's so important that we use the students' mother tongue. And we have a metaphor here from a carpenter, a learner. He says that when I do joinery and manage to hit the nail on the head, it's like having a mother tongue teacher. But when I'm forced to drive in the nail from a complicated angle, it's like having a Swedish teacher. So that's how he feels about this, the ordinary way of arranging literacy education still in Sweden and in the other Nordic countries without mother tongue teachers. It makes it more complicated for many of our learners. And what about the literacy part? We have a model of the literacy coming from Luke and Freebody, that we see literacy and these 3 dimensions and the different use of literacy for text use and text making, code breaking, and analysis. And we have to mix them all and use them all throughout the literacy education, I think. Not just breaking out this code breaking part and focus on that one. And it means that starting with this word with just the letters will be hard. We have to pick up our learners and get them to get the feeling of something that they know, and then start from there. If we've been to the IKEA store, then it's more easy to read the word IKEA as well. And for the basic everyday mathematics, it's important also to draw from the students' experience of mathematical situations. Maybe they don't think of it as mathematics, but and neither do we sometimes, but they are, and they are important to make use of. So now we've got a picture of these 6 competence areas, and I think I'll stop here, and then we could go back to the work for the implementation work and the courses that we have.
Oh, that last slide looked interesting.
Do you want me to? No.
Okay.
Can I do that? No.
Or do you want to come back to it later?
Yeah. Do you want to discuss it again, Helen? Do you want to discuss this picture?
Not that one.
Yeah.
The one before. The one looking for that one. I mean, maybe we come back to that, but I was just quickly reading it because that's sort of into the territory that I'm going to talk about. So the second bullet point there, in terms of the cooperation with teacher training institutions, is into the territory that I'm going to talk about. But first of all, thank you, Karen. That's really, really interesting and lovely to hear it's a little bit more of the examples inside what is a great set of a descriptive set of teacher competences, and nice to see some of the little windows into the classroom or the learning situation. And I couldn't agree with you more about almost everything in terms of the practical detail, particularly I mean, I suppose one always tries not to put the negatives, but the forbidden. You know, it's one of the difficulties I think we have in this area is that if you actually work with adult literacy learners, you find out that, as you said, you know, it's a 73-year-old with a whole life experience and so much to give, with, you know, some things that they want to learn, and that's so, you know, when you work with people, you realize that it's that teaching the skills that I do use the term skills, but I don't mean it in the way that I'm pouring it in as knowledge. But you know, I mean it, if you like, in terms of code breaking or meaning making. But when you're teaching basic literacy functions to someone with that whole life experience, it's a very complex process. And I think we, pedagogically, it's more complicated than many other areas of adult teaching. And I think that we live in a world where people imagine that teaching basic reading and writing is a simple thing to do. Yeah, you know, people who don't know will say, oh, here's someone who needs some help, let me help them. Oh, I've got a book my daughter uses, that will do. Yeah? And they have no idea of how inappropriate it is to pick up a child's learning book and how it doesn't fit. And I think a lot of damage is done. So one of the things I said, Karen, when you were offline, was that for me the challenge, and this, you said something that echoed this, is how can, you know, so we've got a set of teacher competencies. How can we ensure that all adult learners have the experience of being taught by a teacher with those competencies? So really it's about the implementation, and how, you know, there are different stages in that implementation. How do we create qualifications that enable us to assess the competencies in relation to individual teachers? How do we get teachers access to the learning, to the professional development they need? And how there's also a wider question of how that fits to the whole wider system of quality in our systems. You know, all of it geared at making sure that individual learners get the best experience. But I thought I don't want to take too much time with me just talking, because I'm interested in the discussion with the people who are listening to us. But just a little bit about what happened here in England. A little bit of history over the last 15 years, if you like. In 1999, we had a policy position in England where the government said that all teachers of adults should have a qualification to teach, and a qualification to teach adults, not children, yeah? And also that teachers who were working with basic literacy and basic numeracy should have specialist qualifications in those subjects. So we had a really good situation in that we had, you know, from the top of government saying this is important and it must be done properly. And obviously we already had some good practice going on and some practitioners, you know, working in the ways that you describe, but they were a fairly small world of people in a country with a lot more learners that needed to get the right kind of help. And I think probably, as is happening for you in the different Nordic countries, you know, we didn't have a white page to start from. We had a system with teacher qualifications and universities already in place, and we had to work inside that. So our starting point, there was already a national qualification for teaching adults, but it was a general qualification for teachers of any subject, you know, for teaching all the vocational areas. So our starting point was we had to create an extra qualification to add on that represented the subject area, if you like. So people would have to take a general teaching certificate plus something that showed they knew how to teach literacy. Of course, for us, one of the differences with your set of competencies is that in England, numeracy or basic maths is a separate set in its own right. I'd be happy to say a bit more about that later if there's a question about it. But we did originally have it in the way that you have, as a small area within general life literacy, but we found it needed more. So I won't say more now because I'll lose the thread. So we started off with these, we had an imperfect situation where we had to create something to go with what was already there. Then in 2007, we had the chance to review those qualifications, and these are national sets of competencies and national qualifications, to bring that together in a combined way. So from 2007, it was possible to take one qualification that would train you as an adult literacy teacher, yeah? And then there were further evaluations later which created a single set of qualifications, and you could take different pathways through. But in reality, the different pathways was probably a sign of the times in terms of making things more economic. In that, you know, separate qualifications take more resources.
Can I say something now? Do you or do you want to just
please do.
talk along and then I can comment on your? Okay, is that better?
Okay.
Is that
go on,
better?
ask me a question.
Just go.
Or do you want me to keep?
In what way should we do this?
Shall I finish? Is that easier?
Just anyway, Helen, you said that you wanted to have this interactive, so please, it's more interesting when it's interactive.
Yeah,
so,
I like it.
Karen, go ahead.
Could I just ask you about this national qualification that you talked about? At what level was it? Was it the academic level, and what was included in it? How many weeks, or how did you measure it?
The academic level was at university level. We offered the professional learning at slightly different levels. The lowest one was kind of second year undergraduate, and the highest one was master's level. So it varied. And again, that was a compromise because we were working with the general qualification for teaching adults for vocational subjects was, in our system, it's level 5, which is second year university. But of course, in other subject areas, many of the teachers already had a degree, and so we offered it between level 5 and level 7. It varied. And in some universities, we offered the learning in one course where people could take the assessment at different levels. So it might be a shared experience of covering the curriculum, if you like, but with assessment at different levels. In terms of how long the course was, hang on. I think the whole combined course, if you were doing the teaching certificate in the specialist area, roughly 120 credits.
Is that 120 hours?
I think. No, that's university credits. Way more than that in terms of hours.
And it's ECTS point.
Yeah?
ECTS?
Sorry? CATS point.
So that would make it a 2-year program nearly.
Yeah.
1 year full time.
Or 1 year full time. I'm sorry. I'm remembering some of these details from a long time ago. I can check back with colleagues on exactly how many.
We can find that out by Googling it as well. Maybe you'd like to include Sissel's question here. Why was numeracy separated from literacy?
Okay, yeah. Now, we used to do them together, and this was before we had the national qualifications, when we had more kind of, if you like, bottom-up qualifications created by the practitioners. And we would typically bring people onto a course and offer them literacy and numeracy. Then we found out what was happening was that if you look, quite often you might have 20 people in a group. They'd all do the literacy assessment, and only a small group of them, maybe 20 or 30%, would do the numeracy assessment. Because what was happening was we were getting people who were confident in their own understanding of literacy and language, but less confident in their own understanding of basic numeracy or of maths. And so although they were happy to teach a little bit of basic maths, it was really taking them out of their comfort zone. And then we tried, and this was just in the London project that I was working in, then we tried, separating them. And what happens if we advertise 2 different courses, one to train to teach basic literacy and one to train to teach basic numeracy? And we found a whole new supply of people who came forward to teach basic numeracy who were not so confident of their language knowledge. Yeah? And of course, you know, especially when you're dealing with migrant populations, some of your carpenter who knows how to get the nail into the wood, or the person who, you know, just because you don't speak a language or you may struggle with reading does not mean that you haven't got highly developed numeracy skills. You may have been running a business, you may have been a market trader, a farmer, you know, and so we found, actually, although that's talking about the learners, at the teacher level, we found refugees and migrants coming forward to teach numeracy who wouldn't want to teach English because they weren't that confident of their own English. And we also then found, I think, that a whole series of research and development work we did, that to be a really good teacher of basic numeracy, you need an excellent, deep understanding of mathematics. Yeah? And that it's not always the same people as teachers that have that deep understanding of maths and that deep understanding of language and literacy, because they come from different places in our education systems. So it's not that you can't do both, but we found we had more success at getting good practitioners by allowing people to come forward separately. And also, of course, in our numeracy competencies, there's much, much more than in you've got the numeracy as one of 6. For us, numeracy is a separate set of 6 all on its own, where some of the general ones apply to both, about respect between teacher and learner, and, you know, the more general things. But there's a lot more about pedagogy of how to teach maths in an adult environment.
Lovely.
Shall I go back to just a little bit more on the implementation? So we had these qualifications. One of the early challenges we were working in a situation where we had a lot of national energy to improve the levels of literacy and numeracy in the population. And we had this wonderful opportunity that, you know, public statements that teachers should really have good competence. One of the challenges we had was finding enough teacher educators who had the knowledge to help us, you know. So we created the qualifications, but we needed it to happen everywhere, all around the country, and quite quickly. So we had to find ways of making it possible for new teachers and less experienced teachers to access that professional development. And we found that we needed a team of teacher educators to deliver those new qualifications. So what we did was we found experienced teachers, and we asked them to get involved in helping us train a new generation of literacy teachers, and a much expanded, because we had a big growth in the profession, and you know, it was quite a big scale exercise, and we actually had to run professional development programs to train more teacher educators. Yeah, so we worked with universities and colleges around the country to pool that expertise. And if you like, if you were dealing with your set of competencies, how do I? Yeah, that way. And the qualifications based on them, then we needed more than just Karin and her colleagues who'd done that. We needed to create, you know, a national team who could go out and work with people in the regions of the country. I'm going to stop there, I think. But all of that with the aim of increasing the probability that an individual adult learner would find themselves being taught by a teacher that personified those competences. But it is a big challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I can see Robert talking, but I don't know who to.
Thank you. I forgot to turn on my mic.
Yes, there's plenty of material I can refer you to in a number of places. I can follow those links through Robert.
Oh, lovely. So we'll post this time on the website as well. So we still have a few minutes. We were usually quite strict about only sticking to an hour when we have webinars like this. So are there any more questions? Nobody's asked for the microphone, and all these competent people who are listening to us, we really would like some of your questions.
Can I ask Helen a question? Just show her one of our thoughts that we have.
Yes. She's writing, so.
Yeah.
This is.
Well, Karen, perhaps it would be interesting to go back to your last slide, because I could see there the beginnings of how you're going to implement the
yes,
competences, because a good set of competences is an end point and a beginning point, isn't it?
What happened? We've already, I mean, doing this, trying to do this dialogue with departments and universities, and I think the third point here was interesting. As what we are now planning to do, is to arrange developmental workshops for teachers, and this is in the same. I mean, what you just talked about, that we need new teachers that could teach other teachers. So at the last Nordic Alpha conference, we asked all the teachers attending it, 150 teachers, to sign up in one of these 6 fields if they were interested, especially in one of these fields. So they did, many of them did, and from that, what we got there, all these teachers saying that they were especially interested in one of these areas, we're now creating 2 workshops, one with digital educational material and one with this everyday mathematics during the next year. And we have encouraged these teachers to look for funding to meet each other before these developmental workshops. I mean, to visit each other places and discuss their education and the provision they've got.
Okay. Can I answer one of the questions that's come up on the screen? Because
go ahead.
So that they answer them before we run out of time. So Helena, about is there such a thing as a numeracy test for when they're new? Yeah, there are many. There are many that have been used in this country and elsewhere. And in fact, it reminds me of, I'll tell a very short story from a long time ago when I was a young teacher. And I worked in a college of further education where the college had an initial assessment in mathematics for every student that came to the college, and of course some of my newly arrived refugee and migrant learners, they couldn't read the questions about the maths because they didn't have the reading skills, but I learnt, this is what I was saying about, you get people whose math skills are much higher than their literacy access skills. I learnt to ask the students to try the math questions on, the questions got harder as you went through, and I would say, no, please have a look at page 10, and you would occasionally find a student who could do all the equations further on, but they couldn't answer the question that was contextualized in English language. If you showed them something that was just in numbers and digits, and they'd done that before in their own language, they could do it. Obviously, some people couldn't do any of it, but yeah. In answer to whether there's a curriculum in Britain, yes, we have a national curriculum for literacy for numeracy and for English as a second language. We have all three. I haven't read the next question yet. When you say edited literacy, Marta, when you say edited literacy materials, you mean teaching materials?
Yes, she does.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Marta, I mean, and this comes back to Karin's thing, is that the closer the materials are to the individual learners, the better. Because if you're going to build on their previous experience and so on, and the stuff that they do know, then that connection is really important. But obviously, we do have banks of material that show you, if you see how one teacher's done that with learners, then you can kind of take that example and make something similar with your own learners. And there are handbooks that have been written by experienced teachers on how you might approach that with your own group of learners.
But there's something which I found interesting in what Karin said, and you also, is a contextualization of the learning materials. And there, a question might be, you know, how can I to train teachers in using material from each learner's situation or from the media and what's going on right now, so that they really feel that they're learning vocabulary which suits to the discussion in the media at the time when they're learning it.
I would see that as an essential part of an initial teaching.
Yeah.
And also the opportunity to practice doing that and get feedback on doing that from both your peers in the group and from your trainer. Presumably that's in the courses you're thinking of too, Karin.
Okay. Now we have, it's 2 o'clock in Iceland and England and 3 o'clock in Sweden where Karin is, and if there's somebody in Finland it's even later, and we've done our hour and we get tired from this, so I think we'll stop taking questions. Martha has got an answer to hers, so Helen and Karin, in the name of Alfaradett, I thank you very much for your contributions today. This has been recorded, so it will be made available on Alfaradett's web, so people can listen to it again, and people who missed this can come back and listen to it. So from NVL and Alfaradett and Distance, thank you very much for being here and working with us today. I hope you learned something, and this and the slides and material from Helen will be posted on the net, on the website. You see the link in the practical chat. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for your questions, and Helen and Karin, thank you very much for your very interesting presentations and discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.